Joseph Stalin was born in Gorky, Georgia on December 18, 1878. Stalin lived to be 74 years old, dying on March 5, 1953, in Kuntshevo Dacha. Stalin proved to be one of the cruelest and most feared men to have ever walked this earth. Stalin was the dictator of the Soviet Union, which he had power over between 1929 and until his death in 1953. Though arguably, the effects of Stalin's rule weren't fully seen away until the late 1980s. Stalin transformed the Soviet Union into an industrial and military superpower. He used terror and brutality to enforce his will, killing millions of his own people. He even killed his own family members. No one was safe from Stalin's reign. Stalin essentially wanted to catapult Russia an entire century forward. From a very young age, he had revolutionary ideas. These ideas culminated into him outmaneuvering his rivals and eventually seizing power over the Soviet Union in 1929. He started out by killing those he saw as a potential threat to his power. Some were also sent to labor gulag camps, which he had set up early on in his rule. Stalin wanted to change, and he wanted it fast in his image. Stalin pushed for an industrialized Russia. He rapidly increased the production of oil, steel, coal, and electricity. Though achieving these goals wouldn't be easy, Stalin would employ many brutal tactics in order to help achieve his aims. Stalin used propaganda to manipulate his people and the world as a whole. He made himself seem like an innocent and caring leader. He portrayed himself to the world as a picture-perfect leader anyone would want to have, although the truth was far from the portrayed images and ideas. Stalin manipulated every single source of information in the USSR, from the cartoons being produced, the newspapers, photos, books, teachings in schools, and even people. He controlled every single bit of information that was released. He portrayed Russia as an ideal nation with great leadership. That's what was on the surface anyways. Not to mention, he also controlled what work was published from public speakers. There was no way to get anything out without going through Stalin. Those that tried were dealt with. Stalin's propaganda even went as far as to remove people from photographs with him in it after he had killed them. His propaganda was essentially brainwashing Russians to idealize his ideas. A perfect example is when Stalin sent people from the cities to the countryside to pull those people into the 21st century, as he called it. Those that refused were executed. The people knew what they were doing wasn't right, but they kept going regardless. In their eyes, it was for the greater good of all the Russians. This is proof of how effective Stalin's propaganda was. People would willingly and knowingly kill people in order to achieve Stalin's aims. This brings us to the next tool Stalin used: use of force. Stalin was accustomed to solving problems and barriers with violence. If anyone spoke out, if anyone defied him, if anyone disagreed, if anyone fought back, it would all lead to death or being sent to the gulag camps. Stalin killed anyone whom he felt to be a threat to his power. He didn't let anyone stand against him. He killed people for the most simple rule breaks. For example, if you were found in violation of having more food than permitted, the punishment was execution. Stalin had no mercy or remorse for anyone. He even punished and killed his own family members when they eventually started speaking out against what he was doing. In total, it's estimated that Stalin's regime killed 20 million people or more. Those numbers are staggering, but you have to also count for the millions that were sent to the gulag camps, which arguably was a fate far worse than death. Working conditions were beyond brutal, and people were given little to no food at all, virtually starving to death. Stalin's use of force went unchecked. Most people lived in constant fear. Stalin was also known for committing indoctrination. I briefly mentioned this earlier. Stalin used education and television in a way to brainwash people, though Stalin's propaganda was also used to indoctrinate people. Although Stalin became hated by many, there were also just as many people who loved him, believe it or not. People idealized Stalin on levels that I cannot begin to understand. People in Russia actually saw him as a great leader his propaganda made him out to be. People praised Stalin and what he was doing. Stalin's efforts of indoctrination were working considering this. The education system taught youth Stalin was working for the greater good of Russia, which drilled into young people's minds that Stalin was good, which in retrospect, some say he was working for the greater good, but I digress. With indoctrination of people and all his other methods, I believe he went about things entirely wrong. Brainwashing people is not the correct way. Stalin was nothing short of an authoritarian ruler. He didn't allow any freedom. He wanted his will to be carried out without question from society. Every law Stalin introduced was to be enforced with no exceptions. Stalin put people in power who wouldn't question his commands or will. Any politician that did was quickly seen away with. Stalin wanted nothing less than full obedience. As a result, there was almost no sense of free will. Stalin's word was above all others. Whenever he found a problem, he either got rid of the person that was causing it, or he introduced a law that would rectify the issue. Stalin wouldn't have stayed in power for as long as he had if he hadn't employed authoritarian rule. His control over the government and military made him virtually untouchable. Along with his authoritarian rule, there was nothing people could do to go against him without facing severe consequences. In my opinion, Stalin was truly an evil man. He murdered masses in the millions with no remorse. What kind of human being can kill millions and say it's for the better of society? Not to mention that people died of starvation and hypothermia, since many were sent to the gulags, which were cold and dreadful labor camps. I sometimes wonder if there is even a slither of emotion in Stalin. He even killed his own family. What kind of man can do such a thing? Without a doubt, Stalin was one of the worst dictators the world had ever seen. He used force, indoctrination, propaganda, and authoritarian rule to enforce his will and ensure he stayed in power up until his death in 1953. Stalin was a man of pure evil. The way he went about achieving his goals of an industrialized crossed many gray areas. I believe that Stalin is one of the best examples of a dictator for these reasons.